Tybo Rogers was a star, a name that lit up football fields, a young man with a future that seemed paved in gold. A promising athlete at the University of Washington, Rogers was on the fast track to NFL stardom. His athletic prowess was unmatched. His speed, power, and agility were a perfect combination for a young player with dreams of greatness. But in the world of college sports, where the stakes are high, the pressure to succeed can be overwhelming, and for Tybo Rogers, it all came crashing down in the most devastating way possible. To the public, he was the embodiment of success, a poster boy for everything that was right with the system, an athlete from humble beginnings making good, earning the adoration of fans and peers. Off the field, he was the type of charismatic figure that young fans looked up to, admired for his confidence and charm. But behind the gloss and shine of a football star, a much darker side to Tybo Rogers would soon be exposed, one that would turn his name into something far less admired and far more feared. In 2024, everything changed. It started as a typical meeting on a dating app. Rogers, like many young men in the spotlight, used Tinder to connect with women. But what began as a few simple chats and casual meetups quickly spiraled into a nightmare. Two women from different backgrounds and lives came forward with remarkably similar stories. Both women had been involved with Rogers. Both had initially been flattered by the attention from a college football player, and both said that their experiences took an alarming and terrifying turn when they found themselves alone with him. They accused him of sexual assault. They had trusted him. They had believed he was someone they could be safe with. But in an instant, everything they thought they knew about him, everything they thought they knew about themselves, was shattered. The accusations rocked the sports world. Tybo Rogers, the star player with the bright future, was now facing 2 rape allegations from women who had once seen him as a potential boyfriend or companion, not a predator. The case caught fire in the media, and the public was torn. How could a man who appeared so polished, so perfect on the field, be capable of such violence? How could the hero be the villain? The details that emerged from the women's testimonies were chilling. Both women described being lured into a sense of comfort and trust by Rogers. He used his charm and good looks to lower their guards before turning aggressive and manipulative. He was said to have coerced, threatened, and ultimately assaulted them, taking advantage of his fame and physicality to overpower them. The women's accounts were harrowing, and as the case began to unravel, so too did the carefully constructed image of Tybo Rogers as a beloved athlete. The story soon became more than just the tale of a football player who was accused of assault. It became a deeper look into the abuse of power, entitlement, and the dangerous combination of fame and manipulation. For Rogers, his career had been his ticket to everything. But for these women, what was meant to be a simple interaction turned into a horrifying, life-altering event. As the investigation gained momentum, the truth came out in brutal fashion. DNA evidence and testimony corroborated the women's claims, and suddenly, the promising athlete with the world at his feet was reduced to just another statistic. One of many young men whose athletic success allowed them to live above the law. The police, the prosecution, and the legal system would hold him accountable, but the damage had already been done. The women would never be the same, and neither would Rogers. When he was arrested and charged with second-degree and third-degree rape, the public's reaction was swift and unforgiving. Fans who had cheered him on, worn his jersey with pride, and touted him as the next big thing, now found themselves grappling with the harsh reality that their idol was no hero. Sponsors pulled their deals, teammates struggled with the weight of their association, and the university, once proud of his accomplishments, distanced itself from him as the scandal unfolded. But even as Rogers faced legal proceedings, the emotional damage to the victims was far from over. For the victims, The story didn't end with his arrest or his potential conviction. The psychological toll of their trauma, the shame, the doubts, and the disbelief were compounded by a public trial that forced them to relive the horror again and again. And while Rogers would face time behind bars, the impact of his actions would linger in the lives of these women forever. But it wasn't just about what happened on the night of the assault. It was about everything that led up to it. It was about the twisted world of college sports, where athletes are sometimes given a free pass, their status shielding them from the consequences of their actions. It was about the culture that surrounds power, fame, and control, where young athletes, who are often just as vulnerable as the women they hurt, are allowed to make mistakes that cost others everything. Tybo Rogers had been given everything, but in one moment he took everything from someone else, and no amount of talent could ever take that back. In the end, Tybo Rogers' story is one of dark contrasts, from the heights of fame to the depths of disgrace. The athlete who once embodied the American dream is now a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked fame, power, and entitlement. For the victims, the truth came to light, but the scars left behind will never fully heal. The legal system may have been the judge, but the emotional toll and societal costs of such crimes are ones that linger long after the final verdict. This is a story of rise and fall, of hope dashed by betrayal, and of the darkness that can lurk behind the brightest of futures. It is a chilling reminder that the greatest dangers are often hidden behind the most polished masks. Tybo Rogers' story is a chilling reminder that fame and power can easily mask darkness. What seemed like a bright future quickly turned into a nightmare, exposing the dangers of unchecked privilege and manipulation. The victim's trauma is lasting, and while justice may be served, the emotional scars will endure far beyond the courtroom. Michelle Goodman was a name that few had ever heard, yet she held power over the lives of young inmates at Green Hill School, a correctional facility in Chehalis, Washington. It was a job that demanded authority, discipline, and trust. But what Goodman did with that power would forever shatter the lives of those she was meant to protect. A corrections officer by title, Goodman was trusted to maintain order and rehabilitate the young offenders under her care. For many, the correctional system was their last chance to turn their lives around. For others, it was a place where their struggles were only beginning. But in the case of one particular inmate, Goodman was not the guardian he needed. Instead, she became a predator hiding behind the badge. The victim, a 23-year-old young man, had entered Green Hill School with hopes of finding redemption and a chance at a future beyond his troubled past. However, his time behind bars would be marred by the abuse he suffered at the hands of the very person who was supposed to keep him safe. Over time, Goodman used her position to manipulate the young man, slowly eroding the boundaries of professional conduct. What began as seemingly innocent conversations turned into something far darker, an abusive power dynamic that would forever alter the victim's life. Goodman didn't just coerce the inmate into a sexual relationship. She meticulously groomed him using her position of authority and his vulnerability to keep him under control. The victim, trapped in a world where he trusted no one, felt powerless. What made the betrayal even more chilling was the fact that Goodman allegedly took it further, pressuring the inmate into recording their sexual encounters. These videos were used as a weapon, further enforcing her dominance over him. The young man, already in a fragile mental and emotional state, had nowhere to turn. The manipulation continued for months before the situation came to light. But even when the truth began to surface, Goodman's calculated behavior was hard to believe. How could someone in such a trusted position, an officer charged with protecting and guiding these young men, abuse that power so violently? It wasn't just a single act of abuse. It was a series of calculated decisions, each more horrifying than the last. Each encounter took away more of the inmate's agency, turning him from someone seeking redemption into a pawn in Goodman's twisted game. The case became a disturbing example of what happens when power is abused within institutions that should be built on trust. For Goodman's victim, the psychological toll was incalculable. He wasn't just a prisoner in a correctional facility. He was a prisoner in the hands of someone who should have been his protector. And while his body may have been physically confined to a cell, the emotional and mental trauma that Goodman inflicted on him would follow him far beyond the walls of Green Hill School. When Michelle Goodman was arrested in 2024, the public reaction was swift and unforgiving. People were horrified by the abuse of power and the depths to which she had sunk. But even as Goodman faced charges of custodial sexual misconduct, the real horror lay in the lives that had been irrevocably altered. The legal proceedings offered little solace for the victim, who would forever carry the emotional scars of this betrayal. This case was more than just the story of an officer turned predator. It was a window into the broken systems of trust that exist within institutions meant to rehabilitate and protect. Goodman was someone who had taken an oath to safeguard the vulnerable, yet she used her authority to destroy the very people she was meant to help. For the young inmate, the path to healing would be long and fraught with challenges, but perhaps the greatest tragedy of all was the fact that his abuser didn't face immediate consequences for her actions. The case left lingering questions. How many more victims had been silenced? How many others had trusted someone like Goodman only to be betrayed? As the investigation into Goodman's actions deepened, it became apparent that this wasn't just a case of one corrupt individual. It was a story of a system that allowed her to prey on the vulnerable without fear of detection. Her case is a haunting reminder of the real dangers that can hide behind seemingly benign faces. In a place designed for rehabilitation, abuse can sometimes thrive unchecked until it's too late. This betrayal goes beyond the confines of the prison walls. It's a reminder of the hidden darkness within systems meant to protect us. For Michelle Goodman's victim, the betrayal was not just of his body, but of his trust in a system that failed to keep him safe. And for Goodman, despite her arrest, the damage she caused could never be undone. This is a story of trust broken in the most horrific way, of an abuser hiding in plain sight behind a mask of authority. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest betrayals happen when we least expect them, and the scars they leave are far more than skin deep. The true horror in this case lies not just in the abuse itself, but in the fact that such a violation could happen in a place meant to protect and rehabilitate. It's a story of unchecked power, abuse of trust, and the haunting reality that even those we entrust with our safety can betray us in the most unimaginable ways. Michelle Goodman's case is a haunting reminder that those in positions of trust, whether in institutions meant for rehabilitation or care, can betray that trust in the most damaging and unforgivable ways. Her actions left a lasting scar on the young inmate, stripping away his dignity and sense of safety, and exposing a deep systemic failure that allowed such abuse to go unnoticed for so long. As we move forward, it's clear that power, when abused, doesn't just ruin lives in the moment, it destroys the very systems meant to protect us. Some criminals are caught once, their crimes exposed to the public eye, and their punishments meted out with relative ease. But for others, the cycle of abuse continues, often unnoticed, until the damage is done. This case involves Buckland Darrell, a man whose history of sexual offenses seemed to go unnoticed or unaddressed until the past finally caught up with him. His story is a chilling reminder of the dangers of repeat offenders and the failure of the justice system to prevent their further harm. Buckland Darrell was no stranger to the law. In fact, his history was marred by previous convictions for sexual assault. A known offender, Darrell had served time before, yet somehow, despite his criminal past, he slipped through the cracks of the justice system, only to reoffend with devastating consequences. In 2024, after a new victim came forward, the true extent of his patterns of abuse became clear, and law enforcement realized that Darrell's history of sexual violence was far worse than initially suspected. The crimes he committed were chilling in their brutality. His behavior, which escalated over time, began with seemingly innocent interactions that eventually turned violent. Darrell was able to manipulate and control his victims, using fear and intimidation to continue his pattern of assault. His past convictions should have served as a red flag, yet he was free to continue his reign of terror, leaving a trail of broken lives in his wake. The victims who came forward in 2024 described a man who had perfected the art of coercion, using his charm and his ability to manipulate situations to his advantage. But the truth was undeniable. Darrell was a predator. As the investigation into his most recent crimes unfolded, detectives uncovered a horrifying pattern. Each victim who had suffered in silence for too long shared similar stories. Darrell preyed on vulnerable individuals, using his power to silence them. But his latest victim was different. This time, she fought back, and her bravery helped bring him to justice. She was able to identify him, and her testimony was the final piece needed to secure his conviction. Darrell's history of offending raised serious questions about the effectiveness of the criminal justice system. How had he been allowed to reoffend after serving time? Why had there been no more proactive measures taken to prevent him from continuing his harmful behavior? His case exposed the flaws in the system that allowed a known offender to harm more victims. For the survivors of Darrell's abuse, the emotional toll was overwhelming. The scars of his manipulation and assault would never fade, and the long-lasting effects of his actions would haunt them for the rest of their lives. When Darrell was finally arrested and convicted, the public reaction was one of shock and anger. How could the system have failed these victims so terribly? How could an individual with such a violent past be allowed to harm others once again? The case sparked an outcry for better monitoring of repeat offenders and harsher penalties for those who continue their cycle of abuse. But the damage had already been done. Darrell's victims were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. In the end, the case of Buckland Darrell was a haunting reminder that the scars left by repeat offenders go far beyond physical harm. The psychological trauma, the fear, and the uncertainty left behind cannot be easily erased. Darrell may face a lengthy sentence, but it will never undo the harm he caused. His conviction marks the end of his reign of terror, but it also serves as a warning, one that demands a deeper examination of the justice system and its failure to protect the most vulnerable. Some cases feel like they've been abandoned by time itself. Stories left to fade into obscurity, victims forgotten, and justice slipping further and further away. But every so often, a breakthrough comes from the most unexpected places, and the long-awaited resolution to a cold case proves that justice never truly expires. This is the story of Paul Bieker, a man whose life was intertwined with the violent act he committed in 2003. And a story that took nearly 2 decades to finally bring to light. It all started with a horrific crime in the small town of McCleary, Washington. In 2003, a woman was brutally raped in her own home. It was a violent, terrifying act that left the victim shattered and law enforcement scrambling for answers. The investigation moved quickly at first, but despite all efforts, the case soon went cold. There were no leads, no suspects, and the trail went cold until 2022, when a single piece of evidence in a different case would change everything. DNA testing, often the last hope for solving a cold case, had long been at the forefront of criminal investigations, but the technology wasn't always as advanced as it is today. As the years passed, the woman's assault became a distant memory for the public, but not for the victim. For her, every day was filled with unanswered questions. Who had taken her peace? Who had torn her life apart so brutally and then vanished into thin air? Then, in 2022, a breakthrough came when genetic genealogy was used to solve a case that had long been relegated to the archives. A match came back from a DNA sample taken from an unrelated conviction. The name Paul Bieker surfaced, a man who had been previously arrested for another crime. The link between the DNA at the crime scene and Bieker was undeniable. The match that had been hidden in plain sight for years had finally given the case the closure it desperately needed. Bieker, once an unknown, was now a known suspect, and the wheels of justice began to turn once more. In 2024, nearly 2 decades after the crime, Bieker was arrested and charged with the 2003 rape. The victim's relief was palpable, but so was the rage she must have felt. The years stolen from her by a criminal who had walked free for far too long. The pain of not knowing who had hurt her, not knowing when or if justice would come, was finally replaced with a resolution that, while hard-won, couldn't undo the damage done. For Bieker, the long years of freedom came to an end. He was convicted and sentenced to 30 years in prison for the rape he had committed and for the countless years of torment he had inflicted on the victim, not just through the assault, but through the years of uncertainty and fear. His life, once marked by his criminal past, was now defined by the violent act he'd hidden for so long. But this case was about more than just bringing a predator to justice. It was about the persistence of the victim, of the law enforcement officers who never gave up, and the groundbreaking DNA technology that eventually tied the pieces together. It was about how justice, even when delayed, can still be served. The emotional toll on the victim, though, could never truly be erased by a conviction. The damage was done, and it would be carried with her forever. The case of Paul Bieker also sheds light on the incredible power of forensic science, particularly genetic genealogy, which has become a game changer in solving cases that would otherwise remain unsolved. What was once an impossible hope for many families now feels like a possibility for those still waiting for justice. The chilling realization, though, remains that there are countless other victims like the one in this case. Victims whose stories have been forgotten or overlooked by a system that often takes too long to act. For the victim in McCleary, the resolution of this case brought justice, but it didn't erase the years of torment. What's clear is that for the victim, the pain of waiting for answers, the fear of not knowing who hurt her, will never fully fade. Justice may have arrived late, but it came, and for that, both the victim and the community can find some semblance of peace. In the end, the story of Paul Bieker is a powerful testament to the relentless pursuit of justice. It's about the power of DNA, the perseverance of those who refuse to let cases go cold, and the courage of victims who never give up hope, no matter how long it takes. It's a reminder that even the darkest secrets can be uncovered, and the most horrific crimes can still find resolution, no matter how much time has passed. But while Bieker's case shows how justice can prevail after decades, there are others where the key to justice lies in the most unexpected places, like DNA databases. The next story is one where DNA didn't just solve a case, it completely turned the tide on a cold, unsolved rape. The year was 2018, when the peaceful town of Pullman, Washington was shaken by a brutal crime. 2 young female roommates were violently assaulted in the dead of night, left physically and emotionally scarred by an intruder who would vanish into the shadows, leaving behind no immediate answers. It seemed like just another case that might fall into the cold case files. The identity of the rapist shrouded in mystery for years, but in 2022, justice would come in a way that no one had anticipated. A breakthrough that would shatter the silence and bring a predator to justice after years of evasion. It all began on a warm summer night in 2018, The two female roommates, both in their early 20s, were at home in their apartment when an unknown man broke into their living space. The attack was sudden and violent. He tied one of the women up at gunpoint while he proceeded to assault the other. When the horror finally ended, the victims were left in shock. Their world turned upside down. But despite the brutality of the crime, the rapists left no traceable evidence behind. The police collected DNA samples from the crime scene, but as time passed, they failed to match it to any known suspects. In the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, for years the victims tried to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, while detectives worked tirelessly to solve the case. Each year that passed without answers added to the emotional toll on the survivors, their trauma compounded by the uncertainty of never knowing who had done this to them. It wasn't until 2021, when law enforcement revisited the case with a new perspective, that the breakthrough finally came. Using genetic genealogy, a technology that had recently begun to be used in criminal investigations, investigators submitted the DNA evidence into the open-source GED Match database. This was a last-ditch effort, as traditional methods had failed to uncover any leads. Then a match appeared, an unlikely suspect who had been hiding in plain sight for years, Kenneth Downing, a 44-year-old mechanic from Pullman, Washington. Downing had no prior criminal history, and he lived a relatively quiet life in the same town where the crime occurred. But his DNA, now linked to the 2018 rape, told a chilling story. For years, he had been walking free, his past crimes unknown to law enforcement. The investigation that began with a single DNA sample in 2018 had now led them to a man who had lived among his victims, living a life without suspicion while having committed one of the most horrifying crimes in the town's history. In April 2022, Kenneth Downing was arrested and charged with multiple counts of first-degree rape and second-degree assault with sexual motivation. The news of his arrest sent shockwaves through the community. It was a story that no one had expected. A quiet mechanic, a man who had lived in their midst, now revealed as a serial rapist. The victims, who had been suffering for years without knowing who their attacker was, now found themselves facing the man who had stolen so much from them. Their courage and strength in coming forward, in seeking justice despite years of uncertainty, became a rallying point for others affected by similar crimes. The trial was a painful one, as the victims had to relive the horrifying events of that night, recounting the trauma in front of a courtroom. But their bravery was unwavering. They faced Downing, now a convicted rapist, and testified to the damage he had caused not only to their lives, but to the safety of their community. In August 2022, Downing was convicted of the brutal 2018 rape and assault, and the judge sentenced him to a lengthy prison term. He was given 238 months to life in prison, ensuring that he would never again walk free among his victims. The case was a victory for justice, but for the victims, the emotional toll would never truly fade. They would forever carry the scars of their trauma. But thanks to their courage and the persistence of law enforcement, Downing was held accountable for his actions. The case also highlighted the growing role of DNA and genetic genealogy in solving cold cases, bringing predators to justice when all other leads had failed. For the survivors, the conviction was a hard-fought battle, but it was also a bittersweet victory. The years of trauma and pain were not erased by Downing's imprisonment. The emotional scars lingered, but at least they now had the truth. The predator who had haunted their lives was finally behind bars, and for the public, the case served as a stark reminder that no one, not even a quiet mechanic living in a small town, is beyond the reach of justice. Kenneth Downing's conviction is a story of perseverance and the power of modern forensic science. Thanks to advancements like genetic genealogy, a man who thought he could evade justice for years was finally caught. But while the case brought closure to the victims, it also serves as a reminder of the lasting damage caused by sexual assault. No conviction no matter how long awaited, can undo the emotional and psychological scars left by such horrific crimes. For the victims, this case will be a painful memory, but at least justice was served. Negasi Zuberi was a man who seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind a trail of terror, fear, and a series of unanswered questions. His story is one that reads like a nightmare, a tale of kidnapping, manipulation, and a victim's remarkable, heroic escape that led to the predator's eventual capture. What makes this case so gripping isn't just the terrifying circumstances, but the incredible bravery of the victim, who defied all odds to break free from a makeshift prison, saving her life, and ultimately bringing Negasi Zuberi to justice. It all began in 2023 when Zuberi, a man with a history of troubling behavior, took matters into his own hands in a chillingly calculated manner. He lured his victim, a woman from Seattle, under the pretense of a job offer. The meeting turned into a nightmare when Zuberi abducted her, taking her across state lines to Oregon. What seemed like an innocent encounter quickly morphed into a violent and horrifying ordeal. For days, the victim was held captive in a small makeshift cell, with Zuberi using fear, threats, and isolation to break her down mentally and physically. The sheer terror of her situation is unimaginable. The constant feeling of being watched, the desperation, the loss of control over every aspect of her life. Zuberi, a predator with a sickening sense of entitlement, seemed to have complete control over his victim, but what he didn't anticipate was her strength, her will to survive. While Zuberi believed he was in charge, the victim's spirit never broke. She fought back mentally, strategizing every step, waiting for the right moment to escape. Her opportunity came in a small window of time when Zuberi's guard was down. Seizing the chance, the victim broke free from her captor's grasp, running for her life and escaping from the cage of terror Zuberi had locked her in. Her escape was nothing short of heroic. It wasn't just the physical act of breaking free that made it extraordinary. It was the strength and clarity of mind she maintained despite the extreme trauma she had endured. Her escape set off a frantic search to find Zuberi, and soon the authorities were hot on his trail. Zuberi's capture wasn't a swift one, but the victim's bravery had triggered a wave of urgency that led to his eventual arrest. It was a hard-fought victory, but one that left the survivor forever changed. The psychological toll of her abduction and escape would remain with her, but in that moment she proved that the human spirit is capable of fighting back against unimaginable odds. Zuberi, once thought to be an elusive predator, was caught after his victim's escape. His capture ended a terrifying chapter for the survivor, who, though scarred, could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Zuberi's arrest revealed the depths of his depravity. He was a man whose crimes were not just one-off moments of violence, but part of a disturbing pattern of manipulative and controlling behavior. Investigators would later uncover more about Zuberi's past, including earlier allegations of abuse and manipulative behavior, further painting him as a dangerous individual who had been able to slip through the cracks. When Zuberi stood trial, his defense tried to paint him as a misunderstood individual, but the victim's bravery in testifying against him, along with the evidence from his capture, dismantled any defense he could offer. In 2024, Zuberi was convicted of kidnapping, assault, and several other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison, where he would remain, paying for his heinous crimes. But for the victim, the journey didn't end with his conviction. Though justice had been served, the scars of her captivity would be something she carried with her forever. This case is more than just the tale of a predator and his victim. It's a story of human resilience, of the strength that lies within when faced with unspeakable circumstances. It's a chilling reminder that the most dangerous predators often hide in plain sight, manipulating their victims until they have nothing left. But it's also a testament to the courage of those who refuse to be silenced, who fight back when the odds seem insurmountable. The survivor in this case showed the world that even in the darkest of times, a single act of bravery can change everything. The harrowing escape of Zuberi's victim was a triumph of courage and resilience. Her survival story, one of strength, defiance, and a refusal to give in, leaves us with a powerful message. No matter how terrifying the situation, survival is possible. The case serves as a reminder that predators like Zuberi can be found in the most unsuspecting places, but even the most dangerous of them can be stopped when their victims fight back. Christian Sayre was a name that, at first glance, didn't seem threatening. A 50-year-old bar owner in Everett, Washington, he ran a modest establishment that drew in locals looking for a drink, a friendly smile, and the comfort of familiarity. To the community, he seemed harmless, friendly, sociable, and trustworthy. But behind the warmth and the clinking glasses, a darkness lingered, hidden from even those who knew him best. Over the course of 2 decades, Sayre meticulously built a facade. By day, he was the amiable bar owner, the person people waved to on the street. By night, he preyed on women, young and old, luring them into situations where his charm and calculated manipulation gave way to the worst of human depravity. It began subtly. Women who had gone to his bar or been invited to private gatherings often left with a sense of unease, confused by events they couldn't fully process. But as the years passed, a horrifying pattern emerged. Sayre would drug his victims, rendering them powerless before assaulting them. The crimes were calculated, methodical, and cruel, with Sayre exploiting the trust he had cultivated. Some victims were assaulted in his home, others in private areas of the bar, but the common thread was the same: fear, coercion, and manipulation. Sayre didn't stop there. Evidence later revealed that he also engaged in child sexual abuse, a shocking escalation that sent ripples through the Everett community. For years, the truth lay hidden beneath a veneer of respectability, as fear, shame, and intimidation kept victims silent. Sayre's crimes were not random. They were a deliberate and sustained abuse of power carried out with cold precision. The investigation began to unravel in the 2010s as law enforcement pieced together reports from multiple women. DNA evidence, witness testimonies, and a careful review of his long history revealed the staggering scale of his crimes. Investigators discovered that Sayre had committed 16 felony sexual offenses, including rape, drug-facilitated sexual assault, and child sexual abuse. The breadth of his crimes shocked the state. Few could comprehend how one man could have inflicted so much trauma over such a long period without detection. During the trial, the courtroom heard harrowing accounts of his victims, women recounting the moments of terror, confusion, and violation, some struggling to recall exact details due to the effects of the drugs he administered. The emotional toll on the survivors was immense, and the community listened, stunned, as the true magnitude of Sayre's actions came to light. In 2020, after a thorough trial, Christian Sayre was sentenced to 109 years in prison, a sentence that reflected both the severity of his crimes and the enduring damage inflicted on his victims. The verdict served as a stark reminder of the dangers that can hide behind seemingly ordinary faces, and of the courage it takes for survivors to come forward against a powerful and manipulative predator. Christian Sayre's story is one of darkness carefully concealed behind a friendly smile, of decades of terror masked by normalcy. It is a chilling testament to the horrors of predatory behavior, the resilience of survivors, and the imperative for vigilance in communities where appearances can be dangerously deceiving. The case of Christian Sayre exposes a chilling truth. Predators often hide in plain sight, blending into society behind masks of trust and normalcy. Justice may have caught up with him, but the trauma endured by his victims lingers, a reminder that some wounds never fully heal. Yet, as this chapter closes, another dark and calculated force emerges, one whose meticulous planning and cold precision terrorized women across state lines. Marc O'Leary's story is a chilling example of how evil can hide behind a calm, unassuming exterior. To those who knew him casually, O'Leary seemed ordinary, a man living a quiet life in Linwood, Washington. But beneath that normal facade was a calculated predator, a man whose obsession with control and domination would leave dozens of women traumatized. O'Leary's crimes were not impulsive, they were meticulously planned. For years, he stalked women, studying their routines, learning their vulnerabilities, and waiting for moments when they were isolated. Unlike many predators who rely solely on brute force, O'Leary combined physical intimidation with psychological manipulation. His assaults were sudden but precise, leaving victims terrified, confused, and unable to immediately identify or remember all the details of the attack. The nightmare for O'Leary's victims began with seemingly ordinary interactions, meeting him at social events, encountering him in everyday places, or sometimes being approached online. Once he identified a potential victim, he would track her movements, learning when she would be alone, and wait for an opportunity to strike. These attacks were methodical. He would drug some victims to incapacitate them, assault them, and then take painstaking steps to eliminate evidence, cleaning surfaces, removing items he touched, even washing clothes and bedding. For years, O'Leary evaded suspicion. His meticulousness made it difficult for law enforcement to connect the dots between victims, and many women, traumatized and scared, hesitated to report what had happened to them. The crimes stretched across states, Washington and Colorado, making it even harder to link them. The breakthrough came when detectives noticed patterns in the assaults reported in Linwood and surrounding areas. Women described similar experiences, sudden, violent attacks by a man who seemed normal beforehand with careful attention to leaving no trace. Physical evidence began to emerge, and investigative teams painstakingly pieced together the timeline, tracking O'Leary's movements and linking him to multiple assaults. The case gained national attention when it became the focus of the Netflix series Unbelievable, which chronicled the experiences of O'Leary's victims and the tireless detectives who refused to let him remain free. The series highlighted not only the horror of the assaults, but also the failures of the system. Many survivors' reports were initially doubted, dismissed, or mishandled, allowing O'Leary to continue his predatory behavior for longer than he should have. Eventually, law enforcement built an airtight case. In 2019, O'Leary was arrested and in charge with multiple counts of rape, sexual assault, and related crimes in both Washington and Colorado. During the trial, the methodical nature of his crimes became apparent. His careful planning, his attempts to erase evidence, and his calculated approach to selecting victims painted a picture of a man who weaponized normalcy itself. In court, survivors bravely testified, recounting their experiences with harrowing detail. Their testimonies revealed the lasting psychological impact of O'Leary's actions: anxiety, trust issues, PTSD, and a fear that someone so calculating could appear anywhere at any time. The courtroom was a place of both horror and catharsis as justice slowly caught up with a man who had hidden behind a mask of ordinariness for years. Marc O'Leary was convicted in both states and sentenced to hundreds of years in prison. His imprisonment ensures he can no longer harm anyone, but the legacy of his crimes serves as a haunting reminder. Evil often comes cloaked in charm and routine, and the danger isn't always obvious until it's too late. The story of Marc O'Leary leaves us with a haunting truth. Evil can be meticulous, calculated, and hidden behind a facade of normalcy. His crimes were not only acts of violence, they were a violation of trust, a distortion of safety, and a scar left on the lives of countless women. While the law delivered its verdict, we know that justice alone cannot erase the fear, the shame, or the pain. endured by those he harmed. To those who have experienced similar trauma but feel unable to speak up, know this: you are not alone. Your pain is valid, your voice matters, the courage it takes to share your story is immeasurable, and though it may feel impossible, reaching out, whether to friends, loved ones, or professional support, can be the first step toward healing. May God heal your wounds. May the darkness you endured be met with light, understanding, and compassion. Here on this channel and in our community, you are seen, you are heard, and you are deeply valued. We honor your strength, your resilience, and your journey toward reclaiming peace. If this story has moved you, helped you reflect, or inspired courage, we invite you to join our community. Share your thoughts, support one another, and remember that together we are stronger. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life stories that uncover the truths too often hidden, but never forgotten.